The film begins with four friends named Kathy, Jody, Lisa, and Nick, who is Kathy's cousin. They all love diving in the ocean. After one of their diving trips, Nick noticed a bruise on Kathy's hand, but Kathy said it was nothing. Then they talked about going diving again, but they weren't sure if Kathy's husband Greg would let her go. Greg was already waiting to pick up Kathy after their trip. While driving home, Nick kept feeling uneasy and tried calling Kathy because she was worried. When Nick got home, she talked with her younger sister, Annie. In the middle of their conversation, Nick suddenly got a message from Kathy, asking her to come over to her house. When Nick arrived at Kathy's house, she noticed the house was a mess, which made her more anxious. At the dining table, Greg looked distant and in shock, like something terrible had happened. Nick started looking for Kathy and panicked when she saw blood on the closet door. She soon found out that Kathy had drowned in the bathtub, and it was Greg who did it. Since that day, Nick became terrified of water and even traveled to India alone to find some peace. 9 months later, Nick returned, and her friends planned a beach vacation together. When they arrived, Lisa and Jody welcomed Nick with warm smiles. Not long after, Annie came out, surprised and happy to see her older sister again. However, Nick felt a wave of sadness when she saw pictures of their good times with Kathy. The reason they gathered at this beach was to visit an island that Kathy had always wanted to go to. At that time, they wanted to honor her memory. Shortly after, Nick went to her room to calm down while the others got ready for their beach event. After feeling a bit better, Nick joined them again. She told Annie that she had decided to stop diving. However, Annie didn't know what to say because she knew Nick was still scared of the water after everything that had happened. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, they set off on their long-awaited trip to the beautiful island that Kathy had dreamed of. They paddled in small but strong kayaks across the calm ocean. It wasn't an easy journey, and it would take them about 3 days to reach the island. The waves were sometimes tricky, making the trip even harder. As Nick paddled, the fear of the open water still haunted her. Every time she looked at the endless sea, she couldn't help but think of Kathy. The memories of Kathy felt so real, as if she was there, reminding Nick of the tragedy. But Nick pushed those feelings down, knowing she couldn't let her fear ruin the trip for her friends. She kept going, even though she was scared, and hid her worries behind a smile to keep the group's spirits high during the long journey to their dream island. After rowing in the quiet, wide ocean for a while, Annie suddenly stopped paddling, looking a bit nervous. She started to feel something strange, like there was something watching them from far away, even though she couldn't see anything. There, Annie stayed quiet, her eyes scanning the water, trying to see what might be hiding beneath the calm surface. Fear was creeping in, but she tried hard not to show it. Annie didn't want to scare her friends, even though she was getting more and more scared inside. And Nick, knowing Annie well, could tell something was bothering her. She knew Annie never felt comfortable in the middle of the big, unpredictable ocean. To help ease the tension, Nick offered to pull Annie's kayak to make things easier and faster. But Annie, though scared, refused. She wanted to prove she could handle her fear, even though it was growing stronger with every moment. After a while, they stopped for a break and went diving. Everyone except Annie dove for a longer time, cause she only stayed underwater for a short while before quickly getting back to the kayak. But again, Annie felt like something was following her. Just when her fear was rising, Lisa appeared, having just finished her dive because her spear had broken. On the other hand, Jody asked Nick if she was going to dive. Nick made an excuse, saying her sinuses were acting up, but the truth was that her old trauma had come back. Meanwhile, Annie was casually looking around using binoculars. In the distance, she noticed some kids playing in the water near the beach. She also saw a lot of birds flying over one spot. Then Lisa mentioned that it probably meant there were plenty of fish in that area. This made Annie feel a bit calmer. But suddenly, she spotted a shark fin, just barely visible and moving quickly. At that time, Annie panicked and yelled for Nick and Jody to get back into their kayaks because of the shark. They all started paddling slowly, trying not to splash too much and attract the shark. Jody reassured them that it was probably just a reef shark, which usually isn't dangerous, but the sight of any shark was still frightening. As lunchtime was approaching and everyone was getting hungry, they decided to stop at the nearest island. They wanted to rest, eat, and grill the fresh fish Jody had caught. It was a good plan to avoid the shark too. Shortly after, Nick and Jody quickly paddled towards the island, hoping to get the food ready by the time Annie and Lisa arrived, so they could all enjoy a nice lunch and recharge after the stressful morning. But soon, the birds reappeared, and something moved in the water next to Annie's kayak. She looked around and saw the shark fin again. Scared, she tried to paddle over to Lisa, but in her panic, her paddle slipped out of her hands. Fortunately, she managed to grab it again before anything happened. When she looked down, her heart nearly stopped cause the shark was right beneath her kayak. There, Annie shouted for Lisa, but Lisa didn't hear because she was too far away. Suddenly, the shark attacked, biting the front of Annie's kayak, causing her to fall into the water. Lisa finally looked back and was shocked to see Annie in the water with her kayak flipped over. As Lisa tried to reach Annie, the shark attacked her kayak too, knocking her into the water. Lisa saw the shark heading towards Annie and yelled to warn her. And Nick and Jody, seeing what was happening, quickly turned back to help. Moments later, the shark was getting closer, and Annie struggled to get back into her kayak. There, she almost got her leg bitten. Lisa, panicking, slowly swam towards Annie, but before she could reach her, the shark suddenly reappeared and attacked Lisa. The others were shocked, but knew they had to get to shore before the shark returned. After flipping Annie's kayak back over, Annie suddenly remembered the two children playing in the water nearby. She became worried that the shark might go after them. Sure enough, the shark appeared behind Jody, but then disappeared. Jody immediately shouted to warn the children, but they didn't hear her. One girl swam back to shore safely, but the other girl, named Demi, was still sitting on a raft. Upon seeing that, Demi's mother, who was on the beach, ran toward her. Just as Demi was about to jump into the water, the shark arrived. Demi shouted to warn her mother, and luckily, her mother heard and got the other girl to safety. But Demi was still on the raft. Soon after, Demi looked into the water, and suddenly the shark appeared and bit her. Fortunately, Jody arrived just in time and quickly pulled Demi into the kayak, saving her. Not long after, Annie and Nick arrived at the scene. It turned out that the people they met were a family who had been stranded on the island. They had come to the island with their husbands to fish, but the husbands had been missing for 2 days. At that time, the woman told them that there was no phone signal on this island, but the next island had one, and there were people there too. They needed to get help quickly to treat Demi's injury. They planned to go to the next island, but the only available boat was a small fishing motorboat. At first, Nick didn't agree with this idea because it was dangerous and she was still scared from her past trauma. Then, Annie came up with an idea to make the trip safer. She suggested they tie 2 kayaks to the sides of the boat for balance. At that moment, Nick and Annie argued because Nick didn't trust Annie's idea. Nick thought Annie didn't know what she was talking about since it was Annie's first time in a situation like this. They also prepared machetes and spears in case they needed to defend themselves. After a heated discussion, Nick finally agreed to go, and the 3 of them set off. But soon, more problems appeared. The boat started leaking, and before they could fix that, the engine broke down. While checking the propeller, Nick heard a strange noise, but it turned out to be nothing. The engine still wouldn't start, and Nick began to complain since she didn't like the plan from the beginning. Annie got upset too, saying they were doing the best they could. At least they were trying, unlike Nick, who always ran away from her problems. Jody stepped in to calm them down and suggested that they row the boat to the island if the engine couldn't be fixed. During the trip, Annie finally opened up. She told Nick everything. While Nick had run away abroad after everything happened, Annie was the one who stayed behind. She had to handle everything from organizing the funeral, dealing with the police, and taking care of their depressed mother. Nick had always thought that Annie and Kathy were weak, but the truth was, Nick was the one who was weak because she had run away from her responsibilities. Suddenly, the birds appeared again, signaling danger. Jody quickly told Nick to row the boat, while Annie helped to scoop the water out. But out of nowhere, the shark came back, swimming fast and bumping into their boat. Annie fell into the water, triggering Nick's trauma. Luckily, Annie wasn't hurt. Nick, trying to stay calm, told Annie to swim slowly back to the boat. Just then, the shark attacked Annie, knocking her unconscious. And Nick didn't hesitate. Suddenly, she jumped into the water to save Annie. Fortunately, only Annie's life jacket was torn, and her body was unharmed. But the danger wasn't over. The shark came back, and things got really serious. Nick quickly thought of a plan to stop the shark. They decided to use the fish Jody had caught as bait, tying it to an anchor and attaching it to the kayak. The idea was that when the shark took the bait, it would get tangled in the rope and drown. Then, they set up the trap and waited. After some time, the shark took the bait, and it seemed like it was about to get caught. There, they quickly tried to leave the area. But shortly after, they noticed something moving toward their boat. Suddenly, the shark hit the boat again, and it had escaped the trap. Thankfully, Jody managed to get back on the boat, but the shark was still following them. It attacked the boat again, causing more water to leak into the boat, making the situation even more dangerous. Shortly after, Nick had another idea. This time, she thought of using a fishing net. They got ready, and when the shark appeared, they quickly threw the net to trap it. But as they did, Annie lost her balance and got tangled in the net. Then, Nick bravely dove into the water and used a machete to cut open the shark's stomach. Finally, they managed to escape and continue their journey to the next island. Months later, they returned to the beach where everything had happened. This time, they came to place a tombstone in honor of Kathy and Lisa, remembering their bravery and sacrifice. The tombstone was a symbol of their friendship and the memories they would never forget. They also made a video call to Demi, the girl who had been attacked by the shark. In the call, Demi cheerfully told them she had fully recovered from the incident. However, the call suddenly cut off before Demi could finish speaking, likely due to a lost signal. Despite the abrupt end, they were relieved to know that Demi was safe and doing well. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is if you see a shark, maybe don't try to kayak or fish. Just swim to Netflix instead.